Welcome to the Pocket. I'm your host, Scooter, and here for you guys today, we're going to be talking about the NFL's top free agent players and the upcoming franchise tag window that will be opening up tomorrow, February 18th. Lots of teams are going to have big decisions about many of their best players. Some teams dealing with more than others, but nonetheless, this is a very important time for all teams. I know it feels like the Super Bowl just happened and the season just ended, but we are getting right into it with these offseason decisions that all these teams are going to be facing. Here's what the next couple weeks looks like for those teams. As I said, tomorrow is the franchise tag window, the first day that it opens. That lasts for 15 days, so teams have about 2 weeks to make decisions on this. The combine is next Thursday, February 27th through March 2nd, and then free agency is going to start March 12th, which is over a week later. This is such an interesting time of the year. Every NFL team's roster is the most flexible that it will be throughout an entire NFL season. They have flexibility to how they can sign players because, as I mentioned, they can franchise tag them, which means you pay them near the position max for 1 year. Or you could choose not to do that and extend them, which means a multi-year contract extension, or just allow them to hit free agency and dare them to get a bigger offer. You got your free agent class. This year's class is very defensive heavy. There's a fair amount of offensive linemen and a couple quarterbacks. So other positions like skill, offensive skill, you're going to have to plan to acquire or retain some other way. But as they evaluate their options on their own team, that might hit the open market, there is also a third option for them to fill holes in their rosters or replace cap casualties. And that would be the 2025 rookie class, which has its differences from last year's class and falls short in some categories like QBs, but it still has strengths. And you also never really know how a player is going to turn out. What it looks like right now is that it's a great year for defense. Offensive skills pretty good too, although last year's wide receiver class is probably not going to get topped. So let's keep that in mind that through free agency, you seem to be able to get some, you'll have opportunity to get defensive players and offensive linemen. But, in this year's rookie class, you're going to be looking at offensive skill and also defense. So it seems like no matter what holes you're looking for, that's what the market is presenting you and how you sort of want to plan to tap into each category, whether it is the rookie class, the free agency market, or your own team. If you're searching for a QB, though, I will say it's not a very encouraging offseason for that. And then let's talk about some teams that are going to be in some hot water so that if we're talking about one of their players, we can know that context going into it. The Dolphins, they're $11 million, almost $12 million under the cap, and they have a bunch of free agents. So they're going to get hit pretty hard and have a lot of holes to fill. The Falcons, paying all that money to Kirk Cousins, $11 million under the cap. And by under, I mean that's how much in debt they are. And then they got some other free agents, Cowboys. We know them. They haven't really moved. Minus 2.8 million. That's not good. And Jerry Jones is basically their GM. 49ers have a ton of free agents. They have a ton of cap money. They have 48 million. So they have money to pay, but it's to who, right? Which veterans are aging? Which ones of the young players are we going to try to fill? It's going to be complicated for them. The Jets, post-Rodgers era, is going to be crazy. They do have a decent amount of money to work with, 21 million, but they got some guys who are upcoming free agents that they're not going to want to get rid of. Vikings, 58 million. They have a ton of free agents. It was looking like sort of a rebuilding year going into it, but obviously a lot of those players panned out better. So they're going to have the choice, the decision whether or not to pay some of those guys. Saints, they are like completely done. They've been playing this game for years now, is what it seems like. They are $54 million in debt to the cap. From them, manipulating the contract situations, and what do they even have, right? That they're paying all this money to, really doesn't look like very good for the Saints' future. And then the Commanders, they have a ton of free agents, similar to the Vikings. They exceeded expectations, so there's going to be some cap casualties, but they do have $78 million to work with. So now that we've talked about what the free agent class this year is going to look like, what the rookie class is going to be, let's use that context to play a game for these players called keep, tag, or cut. Now, it's really more like, are you going to extend them? Are you going to franchise tag them? Or are you going to let them hit the open market? But let's just keep it simple. I'm a Giants fan, so we're going to start off with this guy, pass rusher Azeez Ojulari. Now, he was actually drafted by Dave Gettleman back in the day. And there's certainly more that goes into this because the Giants are also faced with the decision of whether or not they want to fifth-year option Kayvon Thibodeaux. But this is actually the more expensive decision, as Kayvon would only get paid about $16 million, where Azeez could get 24 to 27, depending on whether he signs as a defensive end or linebacker. I just have him listed as an edge. So Azeez Ojulari, as I stated, was drafted back in the years of Dave Gettleman, so that he has played 4 seasons for the New York Giants at this point, and his stats aren't bad. In his rookie year, he had 8 sacks, which is a great start to a career, but due to some injuries over the next 2 years, he wasn't really able to stay on the field, finishing with 5.5 and 2.5 sacks. So the hype for him had kind of died down going into last year, especially with the hype of the addition of Brian Burns. However, with the addition of Kayvon Thibodeaux and his wrist surgery that required him to miss, I think it was like 5 or 6 weeks. It was quite a bit of time. Azeez Ojulari got another opportunity to show what he can do, and he did not disappoint. I remember specifically in the primetime game against Joe Burrow, 2 sacks, and he was all over the place, and those were 2 critical sacks. But he also got 4 others throughout the rest of the year, finishing with 6 on the year in a rotational role. That's pretty good. Now, the talent has always been there with Azeez Ojulari. The Giants fans and players and teams saw it his rookie year, but it has just been the injury. So this franchise tag exists for a reason. And I don't think just because we have Burns and we'll probably keep Kayvon that it's a bad idea to keep Azeez as well, even if it's on a more expensive deal like this, because if he turns out to be as good and stay, healthy and out there on the field, I think having 3 guys you can rotate would be most ideal. And giving him that franchise tag might be helpful down the run to get him to sign a cheaper extension. So I do think the Giants should tag Azeez Ojulari, and that is going to be a tag for our first one. Let's talk about something a little bigger on the NFL scale, and that's going to be Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins. He's not even the number 1 on his team, but he's built a lot of steam as he thinks he could be a number 1 on another team. So let's take a look at his career stats and see what he's done so far. In his rookie year, 2020, he had 908 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. Pretty good for a rookie season. I'm pretty sure that was Joe Burrow's first year where he tore his ACL and couldn't finish out the rest of the year. But that year, he was the number 1. And then for the rest of his career, he finished with over 900 receiving yards 3 times. He did not last year. He had some injuries. Joe Burrow was injured, so it's understandable. But in the other years, he had 1,100 receiving yards just about and 6 touchdowns in 2021. 1,030 and 7 in 2022. And then in this season, 2024, he had 911 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns with the Triple Crown receiver on the same team as him. So it's amazing that clearly there's enough room for both Higgins and Chase on this Bengals team. And to be quite honest, I'm pretty frustrated with the Cincinnati Bengals organization for not dealing with this sooner. You should know with a position like wide receiver, you need to get ahead on these contract extensions because there's so many of them in the NFL. Most teams are signing 3 starters if they can, and they have hesitated to do so with Chase and Higgins. But now the decision is here, and the question about whether to extend, tag or basically release him is upon us. Now, my take on this is you should absolutely extend him. Do not tag him. Stop playing games with T. Higgins. Have you seen T. Higgins play football before? This dude is an absolute monster. If you remember back in the day, a guy named Martavis Bryant used to be the wide receiver 2 for the Steelers, and that's who he reminds me of, except he's not quite as fast, but he's definitely way better of a possession receiver. And that, to me, might be what he is the best in the NFL at. It's certainly close between him and Mike Evans, but when you're talking about a complimentary X wide receiver, I can't think of any other guy I would rather sign than T. Higgins. Of course, you can make the argument with A.J. Brown, but I would argue he more fills that actual alpha role, whereas T. Higgins is a little bit more of his archetype. But to me, this is a no-brainer. I understand the Bengals have a lot of decisions to make this offseason with Chase, Higgins, Trey Hendrickson, B.J. Hill on the defense, and they already got to, make a lot of changes on that side of the ball anyway. But I think T. Higgins is attached to the best player on your team, the guy who helped you beat Mahomes. And not only do you need to keep that guy happy, but you want to get the most out of Joe Burrow. Give him 2 amazing wide receivers, and at least your offense won't be a problem as long as the line isn't the worst in the league. So there's your answer. Extend T. Higgins. Do not tag him. Up next, we have a very interesting one. It's going to be our first quarterback, and this guy played for the Minnesota Vikings last year and had an incredible comeback and resurgence to his career, and that would be quarterback Sam Darnold. Now, this is a very complicated situation. Considering last year in the first round, they used their pick to draft Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy, and he was supposed to be the future. However, he tore his meniscus in the preseason and wasn't able to play the entire season. So they were left with Sam Darnold, and he carried the ship almost to the 1 seed of the NFC as it came down to a duel in the last game of the season against the Lions, and he did not show up, unfortunately, and neither did he in the next playoff game as they lost and were upset by the 4 seed Los Angeles Rams. So despite his statistically impressive season, a 66 completion percentage, probably it's definitely the best of his career, but that's, becoming a bit of a standard these days. But 4,300 passing yards, 35 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions, a 102.5 QB rating. Holy smokes, Sam Darnold. What a great year. But this is where I have an issue with this. Let's look at Kirk Cousins and the way that he looked, in the Vikings offense compared to how he looks in the Falcons now. And I'm not saying the Falcons are, I'm saying they're not a lateral shift from the Vikings, and that the Vikings QB situation is actually very friendly. Kirk Cousins is an aging veteran, but he was, at least before he tore his Achilles, QB1 in fantasy football, which just means statistically you're doing amazing. But the fact that he's not a mobile quarterback and was doing that really shows you how much he was tearing it up. You've got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, a good offensive line. Aaron Jones turned out to be a good signing. And you know what? I'm just not all that convinced that they need to keep Sam Darnold to make sure that they have a backup plan to J.J. McCarthy, because you know what? They signed Daniel Jones. And I made the argument all the time that Daniel Jones would be, not too bad in a better situation. And you know what? Here it is. And just imagine if you thought Sam Darnold, if you thought his career was over, he was able to revive it in Minnesota. So I think if they are, they have 3 quarterbacks here. Sam Darnold just increased his value. He's going to want more, and he's going to be able to test it elsewhere because everyone saw it. But Daniel Jones, his stock is lower than it's ever going to be. Of course, it could get lower if he turns out to be worse, but I don't think it's going to be worse. So I think they actually should not extend Sam Darnold, not tag him, but let him walk. Keep McCarthy, plan for him to compete with Daniel Jones, and you'll have your starter for next year. So we have our first candidate. I am selecting to walk. And up next, we're going to have a team that was just playing not too long ago, the Kansas City Chiefs. They got destroyed by the Philadelphia Eagles, large in part due to the fact that their roster was just simply inferior to this Eagles roster, offensively and defensively. Outside of quarterback, the Eagles had every advantage. Now the word is going around the NFL, guys like Joe Burrow saying, sign everyone. That seems like the move, and then convert to signing bonuses, keep as much people as you can. So for the Chiefs free agents that people are discussing whether or not they're going to get franchise tagged, you have Nick Bolton, who is praised by Steve Spagnuolo as the Patrick Mahomes of the defense. He recovered that fumble for a touchdown in the first Super Bowl against the Eagles. And then offensive guard Trey Smith. Now, like I said, the Chiefs are going to be going through some changes. They just lost the Super Bowl. The tides have turned. The bubble has bursted, and they need to think about maintaining their roster integrity. With aging veterans like Kelsey looking to probably retire this offseason, guys like Chris Jones, who wasn't able to really be 100% in that Super Bowl. The collapse of all these things, Jawan Taylor being injured, well, it was just one guy, shook up the whole offensive line, and Mahomes was swarmed. So I think retaining players is all the Chiefs need to do. So this is quite simple for me. Nick Bolton's a great player. You need to keep this defense strong. And if Chris Jones is ever gone, at least you'll still have Nick Bolton. So extend him. Trey Smith, interior protection is going to become even more important after the NFL just saw it expose Mahomes, and they need to make sure they retain him and don't get cute and try to cycle through. So extend both inside linebacker Nick Bolton and Trey Smith. Up next, we have Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver Chris Godwin. This is a guy who came into the league at a very young age. I can't remember if he was 20 or 21 years old, but it seems like he's been in the NFL for such a long time. But guess what? He's still only 28 years old, which is wild. Mike Evans is, I believe he's like 31. And they also drafted a rookie wide receiver last year, Jalen McMillan, who's playing with Michael Penix in college, who turned out to be very good as well, as he finished very strong down the stretch of the year. So it looks like, okay, well, you've got your Mike Evans outside replacement, and Chris Godwin is still young. To me, this is pretty simple. Don't even think about franchise tagging him. I understand he's had some injuries in the past, but he's still so young. Sign him to a deal, keep him, Evans, and McMillan on the same team. But if Evans decides to retire, good. You still got Godwin and McMillan. So to me, this is simple. Baker Mayfield's been very productive on the offense, and he's been able to make it work with whoever's been in there. But it's all, of course, been better when everyone's been healthy. And like Joe Burrow said, I think it's just a strategy. When something's not broken, don't fix it. Sign the players who are good on your team. Stop trying to, be too efficient, more efficient than you can be. It's not possible. When you have good players, don't mess it up. The grass isn't always greener. Extend Chris Godwin. Now up here, this is going to get a little interesting as we're looking at the Philadelphia Eagles, who just won the Super Bowl because they do such a good job of making all of these types of decisions. So I'm sure if Howie Roseman decides to do something other than what I suggest here, then it's probably the right move. And that's probably what's going to happen. But hey, I'm going to try my best. So let's go over it. They have inside linebacker Zach Baun, who was arguably top at his position this year. You have edge rusher Josh Sweat, 27 years old. Milton Williams, defensive tackle, 25 years old. And then Mekhi Becton, offensive guard, 25 years old. Now, this is, like I said, this is a great problem to have. The fact that, you just have too many good players to sign. But let's really think about how Howie Roseman would think about this. He's proven that he can draft well and deep into the trenches. But when you look at a guy like Zach Baun, I see that much more as a guy that you kind of found him as a gem. It's not as easy to sign linebackers, to get guys who have the mental capacity for the position. Seriously, you have to be not only knowledgeable, but reactive so that you can make use of that knowledge, because even if you're athletic enough, if you don't make the right choice in time, it's not good. So yeah, I think that is the easiest one. Definitely extend Zach Baun, but it gets really tricky with Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, and Mekhi Becton. And the reason for that is they're all in the trenches, so we can't really use Howie Roseman's draft skills to decide, who it makes sense for him to just try to attempt to tag. So, and ideally, you can sign all of these guys to cheaper extensions, and maybe the Super Bowl win will help him do that. But let's just assume, one of them is going to want to have a good deal, and it's franchise or nothing. So, to me, you could go either way with it, but once you look into it, it becomes fairly obvious who it should be, and that's Mekhi Becton. He's the one who should get tagged. Why? Well, because this is really the first year and since his rookie season that he's been able to stay out there and stay healthy. It's nothing against him as a player, and actually one of the 5 offensive linemen, that's a very important piece as well, as you can rotate guys like Josh Sweat and Milton Williams. You might say, oh, why wouldn't you extend Mekhi Becton? Well, Howie's been able to draft offensive linemen too. And I'm sure there's even a backup there who's just ready to fill his shoes just in case he does go down with injury. But I just think he's the riskiest one, so it makes sense to me to tag him and extend the other 2 if you can afford to. So extend Zach Baun, extend Josh Sweat, extend Milton Williams, but franchise tag guard Mekhi Becton. Moving on from the Eagles, we get to talk about a team that I actually like, and that would be the Baltimore Ravens. They have a offensive tackle, Ronnie Stanley, who's a pending free agent. Now, last offseason, the Ravens replaced 3 offensive linemen and managed to actually do so successfully. I remember week 1 going up against Chris Jones, bit of a mismatch, and it looked like it was going to potentially be a problem there. But as they established the run game and, got into the rhythm of their scheme, their offensive line was able to gel and become a force. But they relied on Stanley to hold it down as, the younger guys got up to speed. And that was a risk that they took because Ronnie Stanley has had injury issues a few years back. And with an older tackle like him who's over 30, you want to be really careful about extending them. You would love to sign them to like a 2-year, cheap deal. But most of them are aware of their situation and they're going to ask for something bigger or they're going to ask for the franchise tag. So he is old and it is risky, but I think that's exactly why the franchise tag exists. And you go ahead and franchise tag Ronnie Stanley. And you know what? If he has another season-ending injury, he might still have more left in the tank, but that's a good time to cut it off and try to move in a different direction. So That's your answer for the Ravens. Tag Ronnie Stanley. This next guy has been my favorite guy to talk about, not just for this offseason, but for the past few months. It's going to be Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback Justin Fields. He showed us what he was capable of on the Steelers. And after the Steelers decided to roll with Russell Wilson, the experienced veteran, and eventually ran out of gas, I believe that they see the higher ceiling for Justin Fields. So I just believe personally that they are actually going to extend him. But I'll tell you why I think they should do that. Justin Fields is in a great spot to be a free agent quarterback because he's not like Sam Darnold where he's necessarily had his whole career like tarnished and like, his reputation ruined or anything yet. I think teams have seen that the Bears sort of spoiled him in the sense that they kind of ruined it for him. But we saw in the Steelers that he actually did pretty good. He was 1, 2, 3, and 2 once they finally decided to bench him, suffering 2 losses in a row to the Colts and the Cowboys. But, their defense kind of let him down against the Colts, and the Cowboys game was really, really close. But Fields' stats were pretty good so far on the year. I mean, he had 1,100 passing, 5 touchdowns, and a pick. But on the ground, he added almost another 300 yards and 5 touchdowns, 4.7 yards per carry. So I thought with Arthur Smith, in the run game that this would work out and sort of develop into almost like a Justin or a Jalen Hurts situation in Philadelphia. But offensive line injuries got the best of the Steelers, and their run game and offense just fell apart more and more as the year went along. So he couldn't really finish the job. And like I said, they benched him for Russell Wilson. But I think you should roll with him. You've been stuck with this same old situation, and Russell Wilson was certainly an improvement, but it only took a few injuries for him to be completely left with nothing, whereas Justin Fields, I think, could make more of a situation like that. But if you do actually give him the support through the offensive line and the weapons, I would really like to see what Justin Fields could look like on a firing Pittsburgh Steelers team. So I think they should extend him and plan to keep him for the future. Speaking of the Chicago Bears, they're going to be our next player, and that's going to be their offensive tackle, Tevin Jenkins, a former first-round pick. And it seems like this is very obvious that he should just be extended, but let me tell you, it seems like he's vital, but he's never played more than 14 games in 1 year. So injury is a concern. And as I mentioned, when you have guys who tend to be unreliable in terms of injury, the franchise tag is the perfect tool to use on them because you give them the money, right? You give them, the best possible deal you can pretty much for that 1 year. But the guarantee, the security of the contract is not there because that is your only concern with that player. So I think this fits perfectly for this situation. The Bears are still sort of rebuilding and they need offensive linemen. They can't afford to get any worse there. But I also think you don't want to just commit to a guy for years if he might not even be there for you because he gets injured. So use the franchise tag on him. See if he's able to put together a healthy season. And if not, you cut him loose the following year. And finally, we are on to our last player. Buffalo Bills wide receiver Amari Cooper, who was acquired in the season through a trade. Now, Amari was very hyped going to the Bills, and it wasn't quite what we were expecting. It was sort of tough to see if there was any chemistry developing between him and Allen, but the big plays that were made between them, it was a compliment between the two of them. And at the age of 30, Amari Cooper is still a very talented player. So I think considering, the risk you take with him because he could get injured, he could fall off because he is older. But the fact that they do also have depth, this is a perfect situation to franchise tag him. You don't know if he's going to be someone you need. You don't know if you're going to have one of your depth guys start to emerge. But in the case that you have him for this year, you'll see what you have in him. And maybe he's worth a 3-year extension after this year. Or maybe he's getting too old and you'd rather just move forward with the young pieces you already have on offense. There you have it. Those are my franchise tag predictions. Can't wait to see how these start to come to fruition tomorrow and any news that might shock any of us. As I mentioned, next week is the Combine. So I'll have players to watch for each individual drill who I think is going to have, a great combine. By that point, there will certainly be many players who have already been franchise tagged or it has been, noticeable that they have not been tagged yet. And I'll do a little bit of an initial reaction towards that news. The following week, 2 weeks from now, we'll have a combine reaction coming out for you guys and then a final conclusion to the franchise or not. And then after that, so this is the whole next month ahead, you'll have free agency predictions and a free agency initial reaction. So before and after March 12th. And then the 5th-year option window finally closes on May 1st after the draft and all of that stuff. And that's going to be what you guys have to look forward to for the next month. So thank you guys so much for watching. Sorry I didn't get that more elaborate and in-depth Super Bowl reaction. I got super sick last week, and you can probably hear it in my voice a little bit, but finally I am to a recording status, and I can get back to it just in time for the free agency window or a franchise window to open. So if you did enjoy the video, please don't forget to support me and the channel and leave a like on the video. It's super easy, but if you enjoyed it that much, please go in the comments and tell me what your thoughts were and who do you think is the biggest potential franchise tag guy? Who is going to be in the biggest drama and holdout? And if you're liking what you're seeing from the channel so far, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I do post very consistently. Like I said, I was sick last week, so 2 weeks was like the longest break I've taken since I've started. Yeah, I think you guys will enjoy the content I'm putting out, and it'll help me make better content for you guys. So other than that, that's all we got for this one. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.